Lovely. Hi, Gavin. Really nice to see you again.
You too, thank you.
Just want to preface on the recording that we are at Lasham Airfield, so if anyone hears any background airplanes or flights, then totally normal. They're meant to be there.
Yeah, they definitely are.
So Gavin works here now, but he's had a most amazing career in life, and I'd really like to ask you, Gavin, about what you feel that you have found a recovery from in your life, and what happened to kind of bring you to that moment.
Okay, so yeah, I was a pilot from a very young age, 14 years old, and I flew gliders until I was about 19. And then I went off and worked for Shell for a few years as an engineer, and then decided to join the army and flew helicopters in the army all the way through for 30 odd years. I suffered very badly from PTSD, starting really in about 2000 and, well, actually starting in about 2008 when I was on a tour in Afghanistan, but really hitting in 2015 when I was on a tour in Central African Republic. I think the PTSD came really from not from being in the army per se, and in being involved in striking people and places, but also in terms of rescuing people, but more from seeing friends and people that I knew, if not friends, killed pretty much in front of me through my career in various accidents. And that's pretty much the trigger was Afghanistan with a particular incident involving some enemy forces, but the effect of the PTSD was caused definitely by seeing too many friends and people I knew well killed right in front of me.
Thank you for sharing so much. And if you wouldn't mind, what did those symptoms feel like to you?
So I went from being a very confident, strong, fit, outdoor type person, never worrying about any situation I put myself in. I mean, I was a keen sailor, keen climber, obviously a pilot, drove cars fast and all that sort of thing. But also, great, happy into DIY and big project DIY, building a whole house and that sort of thing. And I never once suffered from anxiety or in any of that until I started suffering from PTSD. And the main impact of PTSD on me, apart from the physiological symptoms of massive headaches and things, was mainly the stupid anxiety, which could be from anything from making a big decision to just walking through a set of trees in a copse with the dog and with the wind blowing, and making me think that maybe one of those trees was just going to fall down and take us out. Anxiety definitely was the key issue for me.
Yes. Like you said, it can sort of feel totally irrational, but it can also be about completely rational things.
Yeah.
And you talked about it in your book, and I'd like to cover that shortly. Is what did you find helped you resolve, or at least significantly improve those PTSD symptoms?
So I think the first thing obviously was going to get some help, and getting some help from, I was lucky, the top army psychologist took a look at me and my symptoms and my history, and confirmed that I was very definitely suffering from PTSD, not anything else, not depression. I've never been depressed in my life. It was PTSD. So he put me on to, I had some counselling, one-to-one counselling with I-CBT for I think about 4 months, with two very good staff sergeants, as they were. They were both medical practitioners, but in the army. But also in then talking about what I was suffering amongst my peers at the time, because one of my big anxieties was that my peers would think I was a complete loser because I was suffering from PTSD, which none of them did. Most of them were extremely helpful and supportive. And then talking more about it in the wider world. So for instance, doing talks about my flying career to all the people at the flying club, and at the end of it talking a little bit about the PTSD and how it had affected me, and how I was recovering, but albeit slowly at first. But I found that the more that I talked about it with people, then the more I improved. And writing the book was an extremely cathartic experience. And it started just by writing down the details of the various accidents I'd had, I had seen where people had been killed in front of me, and then expanding on those, more detail about how they happened and what happened, what I was doing at the time, and what my reactions were, and then just really being more and more open about what I'd seen and the effects of it on me, and that I found to be very cathartic, but also it did help in reducing the anxiety considerably.
When you were writing it, did you feel emotions arising, or was it? How did you feel while writing?
Funny enough, I didn't. I did when I was doing my talks. I did well up. I found it very hard to speak the first time I talked about the suffering PTSD in front of there were about 100 people in this particular talk, and I couldn't talk for about a couple of minutes out of the last 10 minutes, and eventually managed to get myself going. But writing the book, although it made me think harder about what I'd seen and actually visualising what I'd seen, I didn't find that hard. I think it really was, a truly cathartic experience.
Could you explain to me why you feel that the I-CBT worked? What in your understanding is why it works?
Okay, so for me, certainly, my key things were, or at least I believe my key things were, that I couldn't help most of these people who'd been killed in front of me. There was nothing I could do. I tried to rescue a few of them, and some of them I actually did manage to get on one incident, get some people out of the back of the helicopter, but the guys in the front were killed. And the other incident, then the helicopter broke up in midair, and they were all killed probably before they hit the ground. A girl that was killed in a gliding accident, she was alive when we got to her. She died soon after, while we were trying to get her out. So for me, I think it was important for me to understand in my own head that I wasn't responsible for any of these accidents, and that there wasn't actually anything I could have done to help these people any more than I did, or tried to. And that was the sort of key. That was the key thing. And then they were linking into being involved in operations in Afghanistan and being involved with people being killed. That was also a big guilt thing, but working eventually to understand that if I hadn't been involved in that, then these particular individuals, who were all quite high value people within the opposite forces, then they would have killed more of our soldiers. There'd be more soldiers killed by bombs or shot or whatever. So it was really working using the I-CBT to look at each incident in turn and try and work out why I couldn't have done anything else. And once I realised that I couldn't have done anything else, that was a big help in terms of the guilt, which was causing the anxiety as well, I think.
Absolutely. So I think I'm understanding that you're saying that this process of deeply being able to rationalise each decision and situation and your place within it helped your brain to understand that this was the best possible outcome, or at least the one that you had absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
That removal of personal responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's true. The removal of personal responsibility for the accidents, for sure, and an understanding of why it was necessary to do the things I did as I was serving the army. Yes, definitely.
And how long did it take? Approximates are fine, between you starting the I-CBT and all the other work that you've done to get where you are now.
Okay, so I first suffered what I didn't know at the time, but I do know now, was the first real anxiety attack while I was in Afghanistan, which was 2009. Came back and everything calmed down. And then going to Africa in 2015, it was whilst I was in Africa that I had started having the real headaches and big anxiety attacks, which probably was the full-blown PTSD really starting. Came back, and within about 6 months I was having the treatment. I'd sort of pushed on for 3 or 4 months without telling anyone what was going on in my head and the headaches and everything else. And then once I told people, then actually my bosses were very good and said, you've got to go and get some help, and gave me time off to go and do it and everything, which I did. So that would be roughly 2016. I left the army pretty much as that treatment finished, 2016. And then I would say it was 3 years before I then started doing these talks and then thinking more about the incidents and everything else. So that was a period where I was still having anxiety attacks, but I was able to rationalise them, not necessarily instantly, but I could tell that it was something that shouldn't be happening to me. Therefore, if I thought about it properly, it would probably go away, recede into the background, which it did generally. And then doing the talks from 2016, 17, 18, and then starting to write the book in 2019 and published in December 2023.
What are the lasting symptoms you have now, and what do you do when your symptoms come about?
So I still suffer from some anxiety occasionally, and it's usually, for instance, this last weekend we've been having an extension built or extension garage converted, and actually we decided that the builders had to go because they weren't doing their job properly, and so we sacked the builders, and I said, because I'm good at DIY, that I can finish off what there was left to be finished off. And then it was when you first get down there with spanner and hacksaw or whatever and start to cut the first pipe, and you think, oh shit, am I going to do this correctly? Excuse my French. And that anxiety is something I would never have happened before the PTSD. So when I built my own house in 2011, I was doing everything, major jobs, and I never once thought, is this the right thing to do? Am I doing this correctly? I just did it. So that sort of anxiety comes back in occasionally, and it's there until I recognise, or until my other half recognises that I'm suffering from it. And if it's hurt, she'll just say, Gavin, you're becoming anxious, and I'll go, oh yeah, thanks, and I'll work through the process in my head quickly about why I'm feeling anxious, and then that generally will make it go away.
Is there anything you feel had to change in your life in order for the things like the I-CBT and the public speaking to work to help you with the PTSD?
I think for me that being more open about what you're feeling and talking about it with people rather than assuming that they're going to think badly of you because you're saying that you're having a problem, then that is a key thing. It really is a key thing, and I think it's for anybody. And whether anything in my life could have been changed to make that easier, then I suspect not. I was a keen mountaineer, sailor, everything else. I spent my life flying helicopters in the military, all dangerous stuff, or potentially dangerous, without a thought about how dangerous it was. It was A, fun, but B, it was a good job as well.
It sounded like you had the physical openness, but
Yeah,
less of the mental openness.
Yeah, probably.
So getting that mental openness helped you overcome the symptoms.
Yeah, I think it probably would. I think you're right, because as an alpha male, which I think most people that are in the army probably are, or alpha woman indeed, then you tend not to open up. And I know the army's got much better in the recent times of having decompression talks and everything after people have been in action, which in my time they never did. And I think, yeah, being open, discussing things has got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. You mentioned a little bit in your book about in the early stages of the PTSD flare-ups that you would use music as part of your coping mechanism. Is that something you continued with, or was that just those early stages?
No, it is something I continue with occasionally. And if I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm feeling anxious and I don't know why I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling scared even sometimes, I do sometimes still have quite vivid nightmares, and you can wake up from those quite scared. And I do tend to either put my earplugs in and listen to music, or go downstairs and listen to music for an hour or so. And I do find, it's not loud music, but it's not necessarily, the waves lapping on the shore, calm music. It's just music that you like. I find, is calming, and that helps.
Is there anything that you feel that you can do now in your life that you couldn't do when you were in the worst of the PTSD?
There's probably nothing that I can do now that I couldn't do then, but there were certainly a lot of things then that I felt I couldn't do, even though if I was really pushed, I would. Like, for instance, working on the car or something, then I had to force myself to do it when I was suffering from PTSD, knowing that before PTSD I could do it just fine, so therefore I must be able to do it. Yes. But it was quite a battle sometimes to push myself to do it. And I would tend to push things off, or wait a bit and then come back and do it. Instead of just getting on and doing it, I'd go away and think about it, and then think about it more and think about it more, and then eventually go, oh, stupid idiot, get on and do it. It'll be fine. And it always was.
A much easier flow towards
Yeah.
doing the
Yeah.
practical.
Whereas
day-to-day
now I'll just go
things.
and do it. And even if I do feel a little bit anxious about it, and that is pretty much gone in terms of being anxious about things that I know I can do, then I'll just give myself a kick and go and do it.
That's a hugely significant improvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you're right in that it doesn't physically stop you from doing it. Like,
No.
it's not that you don't have arms.
No,
but
it's up
that,
here.
That wall in the head
Yeah.
that says I can't do that
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
It's a huge change. And before the I-CBT, forgive me if the question isn't quite relevant in your circumstance, was there any other methods you tried to help overcome the symptoms?
No, because I until I was diagnosed, I didn't know what was I didn't know what was going on at all. I didn't know what it was. I knew I wasn't depressed, and never have been, and probably never will be. But I didn't know what was happening. I mean, the doctors wondered if I had a brain growth or something. They'd given me such violent headaches. So I went and had a scan and all that sort of stuff. And of course, all that came back and saying, no, you're perfectly okay physically. So we then knew it had to be the mental side.
Yes. It's sometimes a difficult diagnosis for some people to find, where they don't have that physical, here's the one answer, but it's something that you have to work on independently.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you first got the diagnosis?
Well, I was worried, and I was also slightly ashamed. But the brigadier, who was the chief psychologist, was very, very good, and he asked me a couple of questions basically about what my life in the army had been about, which was mainly flying and then some special stuff. And he then said to me, well, who do you think comes to me suffering from PTSD mostly? And I actually said, well, probably an infantry soldier who's been shooting people, or because he's had to, or his friends have been blown up in front of him. And he said, well, actually, no, it's most likely the pilots who repetitively see people die in front of them over their career, and then the people doing the other work, which you've been doing, where you're very much right in there and seeing what the results are of your work. So I think that was it made it easier to understand and to swallow the being ashamed feeling, I think.
Absolutely. It sounded like you had a really good support group. And
Yeah, they were brilliant. They really were brilliant.
you mentioned now your partner, she's super supportive
Yeah,
as well.
she is. So I was married before, and she wasn't as supportive, but my partner's excellent, really excellent.
If your symptoms came back to a significant degree, because I want to clarify on the recording that though there is these mild anxieties, they come, you know how to manage them. It's occasionally the bad dreams. If your symptoms did come back to those early first heart palpitation style events that you talk about in your book,
The doom-laden feeling, which is what came. Yeah.
what would you do if that came to that stage again? What would be the process?
Well, I would go back. I have kept all my notes, so I would go back into my notes, and I would work out if I wasn't doing something that I should have been doing in terms of the I-CBT process. And if that didn't work, I go back to the doctors and say, get me fixed again.
Help me. Are there any particular parts of the I-CBT that really stand out for you? Parts of your process that go, I really like that question I ask myself, or a thing that you go through?
I think the main one, probably the most important one, was if you hadn't been there or doing that particular task, what would have been the outcome? Did you make a big difference? Yes, but could you have stopped whatever it was happening happen? And the answer generally was no, and that's a really important thing to understand.
Yes, and I suppose that can, in my head, apply to day-to-day situations now, is it? If you hadn't been there and done your best at that thing, potentially it could have been a worse outcome anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. And I think you have answered this question, but I'd love to just kind of hear a summarised version of it. Is why do you think that PTSD as a condition came to you and perhaps wouldn't have come to another person who had the same career that you had? Why you got PTSD as opposed to every person that had your career?
Well, I hate to say it, but probably because I'm a more sensitive person than your average army officer. I care more for people probably than most of them do. I'm not saying they're all bad or anything, but just in upbringing, both my parents were doctors. I was a grammar school boy, not a public school boy, and I think you just have a slightly different mindset. And my mindset was more on, I could have been a doctor. I wasn't brainy enough. I didn't work hard enough to be a doctor, but I would have loved to have been a doctor if I thought that I could, but I just knew that I couldn't academically. So, I think that is probably why, because I'm more of a caring person. So it affected me deeply when people were killed in front of me and I couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. I so recall this a pattern that happened that you kept talking about in the book, about how you would very quickly, and I know that there's thought about it now, but at the time there was no time to reflect. It was just it is what it is, on to the next thing. That there was none of that processing time
Yeah.
that you're given these days.
Yep.
Is there anything you want to end on, or any advice, or anything you feel you want to share with people as a final part?
I think the key things that, if you want to take anything from my little chat, are: don't be ashamed of the fact you're suffering. Talk to somebody about it, and don't just talk to one person about it. Make sure that people know you're suffering, and talk widely and ask people about their experiences, because you'll probably find that actually you're not the only person that's been in that particular place, and that helps a lot.
Thank you, Gavin. That's a really lovely end.